In 2020, Eric Schubert was scrolling through cold cases on his laptop. The 20-year-old college student had a thing for genealogy and DNA puzzles. Most nights, he'd dig through unsolved murders, looking for ones he might be able to crack. Then he found her. Maurice Civarella, 9 years old, murdered in 1964 while walking to school in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. For 56 years, nobody knew who killed her. What happened next would change everything. This college kid was about to solve what seasoned detectives couldn't crack for over half a century. Sometimes the biggest mysteries just need fresh eyes. Wednesday, March 18th, 1964, started like any other day in the Civarella household. 9-year-old Maurice Ann Civarella woke up early in the bedroom she shared with her little sister, Carmen Marie. "Close your eyes, Dune," she whispered, using her nickname for her sister. "I'm gonna turn on the light to get my clothes." Maurice was the kind of kid who thought about others first. She carefully picked out her outfit: a dark jacket and skirt, black tights, and a colorful scarf. She put on her silver ring with the tiny diamond and fastened her yellow gold necklace with the cross around her neck. But that morning was different. Maurice's teacher at St. Joseph's parochial school was celebrating a feast day, and Maurice wanted to honor her with a gift. She selected 2 cans of fruit from her father's grocery store. It was exactly the thoughtful gesture that made Maurice who she was. This act of kindness would cost her everything. Instead of walking to school with her siblings like she normally did, Maurice decided to leave early. She wanted to drop off the canned goods before daily mass started. At about 8:10 a.m., she stepped out of her family's house and began walking alone down the familiar streets of Hazleton. She told Carmen Marie she loved her as she headed down the stairs. Carmen Marie, still half asleep, told her sister she loved her too. Neither girl could have imagined these would be their last words to each other. The Civarella family lived in northwest Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town where kids walked to school alone and parents left their doors unlocked. Carmen Civarella ran the little market right next to their house, working dawn to dusk 7 days a week. His wife Mary worked at one of the knitting mills downtown. They were hard-working Italian Americans raising 5 children in a community where everyone knew everyone. Maurice was special. This little girl with bright blue eyes and dark hair wanted to become a nun when she grew up. She was devout, responsible, and reliable. She didn't skip school or break rules. She was the type of child who followed through on her commitments. The walk to St. Joseph's was one Maurice had made hundreds of times. 6 blocks through the neighborhood, past houses where she knew the families. The March air was crisp as she walked, the 2 cans of fruit secure in her school bag. Somewhere along those 6 familiar blocks, Maurice encountered someone who would end her life forever. At school, the nuns noticed when Maurice didn't show up for daily mass. When lunchtime came and went without her coming home, her absence became impossible to ignore. Carmen was at the grocery store, Mary was at the mill, and the other kids were at school. It was just another normal day in Hazleton until it wasn't. When the school contacted the family about Maurice's absence, concern quickly turned to panic. This wasn't like Maurice. Carmen closed the store and started searching around St. Joseph's, desperately hoping to find his daughter. Police were called, and neighbors joined the search because in small communities, everyone helps find a missing child. But as afternoon wore on with no trace of Maurice, a terrible discovery was about to be made. About 3 miles south of Hazleton, in a section called Millsville, a man was giving his 16-year-old nephew driving lessons. They'd chosen quiet back roads scarred by decades of coal mining, dotted with abandoned strip mines that had become dumping grounds for garbage. Just after 1 p.m., something caught their attention in one of the old mining pits. At first glance, it looked like a large doll, a splash of blue fabric against dark earth. But as they looked closer, the horrible truth became clear. Among the garbage and debris lay the body of little Maurice Civarella. The scene was horrific. Maurice's body was still warm, meaning she'd been killed only hours before. She'd been bound, gagged, and sexually assaulted. The cause of death was strangulation with her own shoelaces. The 2 cans of fruit she'd selected for her teacher were found beside her body, a heartbreaking reminder of the innocent mission that led to her death. Word spread quickly through Hazleton. Carmen Civarella was still searching around St. Joseph's when someone casually mentioned they'd found the Civarella girl dead. The words hit him like a physical blow. At the knitting mill, Mary was overcome with horrible anxiety before she even got the news. A mother's intuition told her something was terribly wrong. The discovery shattered the innocence of the entire community. Parents called their children home early from school. Streets that had seemed safe now felt dangerous. The unthinkable had happened. A child had been murdered in their quiet town. The Pennsylvania State Police launched one of the largest investigations in department history. More than 230 officers worked on the case at various times. They documented the crime scene, collected evidence, and began trying to understand what happened to Maurice. The evidence was extensive. DNA was collected from Maurice's clothing, biological material left by her killer. But in 1964, DNA analysis didn't exist. These crucial pieces of evidence were carefully preserved without anyone understanding their future importance. Police interviewed hundreds of people throughout Hazleton and surrounding areas. They spoke to neighbors, teachers, store owners, anyone who might have seen Maurice on her final walk. The investigation revealed disturbing details. The killer was likely familiar with the area, knowing about the abandoned strip mine where he disposed of her body. This suggested a local resident rather than an outsider. State Police Corporal Mark Barron would later say, "What happened to her changed this community forever. The way you lived changed after March 18th, 1964. For the Civarella family, the investigation was both hope and torture. Hope that the killer would be found, but torture in reliving their daughter's murder over and over. Carmen and Mary handled the tragedy with remarkable strength, cooperating fully while still raising their 4 surviving children. Despite months of intensive investigation, leads dried up. Suspects were questioned, but none proved to be the killer. Detective Thomas McAndrew worked the case for 26 years, becoming personally invested in finding Maurice's killer. But the case that seemed promising with physical evidence and witness accounts went cold. The case was reviewed annually, with new investigators bringing fresh perspectives. New technologies were applied as they became available. But for decades, nothing broke the case open. The impact on Hazleton was lasting. Residents never forgot Marisol Civarella or the monster who killed her. The case became part of the town's identity, a tragic reminder of the day their community lost its innocence. Then, in 2020, everything changed. Eric Schubert was an 18-year-old history major at Elizabethtown College with an unusual passion. Since childhood, he'd been fascinated by genealogy, spending hours tracing family trees and learning about complex relationships connecting us to our past. By college, Schubert had already helped police agencies crack cold cases using genetic genealogy, a technique combining DNA testing with family tree research. He owned ES Genealogy, his research business, and earned a reputation for solving puzzles that stumped experienced researchers. When Schubert came across the Marissa-Chivarella case, it immediately captured his attention. The case had physical evidence, DNA profiles, and had been carefully preserved. But he faced a challenge. Pennsylvania State Police weren't thrilled about working with consultants, especially college students, with no formal law enforcement training. However, Schubert had something impressive: a track record of success. His work on other cold cases showed that genetic genealogy could solve cases that stumped traditional investigators for decades. The partnership began in 2020 when genetic genealogy was producing remarkable results nationwide. The Golden State Killer case in California showed that decades-old cases could be solved by combining DNA evidence with genealogical research. Schubert's approach was methodical and patient. He uploaded the DNA profile from the crime scene to public genealogy databases, looking for distant relatives of the killer. The process required extraordinary patience, working backward from distant cousins to identify potential suspects. For Schubert, the Chivarella case became an obsession. He spent countless hours building family trees, analyzing DNA matches, trying to identify suspects. The work was emotionally demanding and intellectually challenging. "This was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life," Schubert would later explain. "It means so much to me that I was able to provide answers to the Chivarella family." The exhumation was approved in early 2022, nearly 58 years after Marissa's murder. The process was expensive and emotionally challenging, but represented the best chance of solving the case. DNA analysis took several weeks. Investigators had to extract usable DNA from tissue samples over 40 years old, then compare it to crime scene evidence from 58 years earlier. On February 3, 2022, the results came back. The DNA from James Paul Fort's remains was a perfect match to the DNA evidence from Marissa Chivarella's murder. After nearly 58 years, the case was finally solved. On February 10, 2022, Pennsylvania State Police held a press conference packed with current and retired investigators, Chivarella family members, and media who'd followed the case for decades. State Police Corporal Mark Barron stood at the podium with obvious emotion. Carmen Marie, Maurice's sister, spoke about their family's response. "We have so many precious memories of Maurice. At the same time, our family will always feel the emptiness of her absence. We'll continue to ask ourselves what could have been." The family's response was remarkable in its lack of hatred. Their parents had raised them to focus on love and forgiveness rather than anger and retribution. Even facing such tragedy, they maintained their faith and commitment to justice over vengeance. "It's never been about hatred," Ron explained. "Never about punishment or revenge, only justice." The press conference highlighted Eric Schubert's crucial role. The young genealogist, now 22, was recognized for his extraordinary contribution. His work accomplished what generations of experienced investigators couldn't achieve. Perhaps most disturbing was realizing that Fort had lived in Hazleton for 16 years after murdering Maurice, continuing to work as a bartender and interact with community members who had no idea they were dealing with a child killer. He attended the same churches, shopped at the same stores, lived in the same neighborhoods as the family he'd devastated. But justice, though delayed, had finally come. On February 10, 2022, Pennsylvania State Police announced they'd solved one of their oldest cold cases. The Chivarella family finally had their answer. Eric Schubert, now 22, had accomplished what generations of seasoned investigators couldn't. Sometimes justice takes decades. Sometimes it takes new technology meeting old evidence. And sometimes it takes a college kid who won't give up on a little girl who deserved so much better. If you enjoyed this story of how genetic genealogy is solving impossible cases, hit that subscribe button and let me know what cold case you'd like me to cover next.